Hello and welcome. I'm Tracy Ryan, and in this video, we're going to talk about the three main mistakes in implementing the ISO 9001 standards and quality management system for companies. We'll give you tips here until the end of the video on how to implement ISO 9001, a good quality management system in your organization without making those common mistakes that we usually find during audits. The first tip is that if you like content related to the auditing universe of certifications, keep an eye on the QMS YouTube channel. We always have excellent videos, very relevant and in-depth content for you to learn more about this universe and implement valuable tips in your organization. So leave your like here, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to receive new notifications, always with new content as it goes live. Well, to begin with, there's nothing like talking about processes. So ISO 9001, the standard of standards, deals with the quality management system. And the first point we identified as a common mistake is for companies to go through their process evaluation too quickly. So, tip number one, the first mistake we're going to deal with here is a failure to clearly define processes and responsibilities for those processes. What we often see is that organizations design or use market tools, such as a turtle diagram or sometimes even a vine. Here, some market tools for mapping processes, and they end up leaving very much in the hands of the person who manages the system, the quality person simply. And they end up drawing this process based on what they perceive, understand, and often even interview other employees in the organization, but without validating it, without really checking that those processes, those activities, the people responsible and authorities are validated, up to date, that the documentation being generated is in fact consistent with the organization's routine and practices. I believe that, just as in QMS, in your organization, things are very dynamic, they change very quickly, so it's very important when mapping processes and defining the critical items and most relevant indicators that your organization is also able to keep them up to date. Keep the people who are responsible for the processes, for the departments that are active, keep them engaged in updating this documentation, this tracking, this proper mapping, so that your documentation is always clear and up to date and relevant. And as an auditor's tip, during an audit, we always try to understand how those responsible for the management system, those responsible for each process in a system, know about its mapping. So we don't want to see what kind of tool, what methodology you used. That's important too, but it has to make sense for your organization. So what's most important is that the person in charge, who is in charge of that process, who is responsible for a process, knows how to clearly answer what risks have been mapped, what the main activities are, the inputs and outputs, the indicators, and those most critical objectives. What are the main monitors used by the organization or required by the organization for that process? That's what we want to understand and check how it has been implemented. So, not just as a pretty tool, but also the clear design of each of these steps and how these processes complement each other. During an audit, we usually start by wanting to understand just that. So make sure that the map you've drawn of your organization actually relates to the current dynamics of your company. An additional tip in this regard is to use process mapping software. There is a lot of software on the market that can do this, some of it paid, some of it free, but these tools can help you make updates regularly and make it easier to update and make your documentation available. A second mistake we regularly encounter during audits, especially initial ones, is the management system. With regard to the excessive focus on drawing up documentation and little focus on the effectiveness of using these documents within the processes. So, while your organization is preparing to seek certification, essentially ISO 9001 for quality management, it's natural that by reading the standard and talking to people internally, you'll identify the need to document processes, procedures, work instructions, policies, and all the documentation that is required by a management system. The only question is to make sure that this doesn't become the main focus of your implementation. ISO 9001. Quality management system is not about documents, it's about process effectiveness. This has to be your focus, and your documentation has to support and sustain this effectiveness, sustain this objective, which is precisely to validate and guarantee that the flow of processes, the inputs and outputs are being well understood and working properly. And not that it's being bureaucratized by using a theme that companies that overdo the documentation often end up noticing. So we've identified that a common mistake is to assess that implementing a management system has ended up bureaucratizing or making things more difficult within your organization. Make sure that your documentation, the forms you're going to use, the spreadsheets, the controls, all the procedures will help you to make action systematic. Your work methodology is better, easier. So when you hire someone, it will be easier to train them. When you need to render or lose a process to someone else, the information is clear and precise. There's less rework. The documentation of this management system has to serve this purpose and not to make everything more bureaucratic or even worse, just to show the auditor on the day of the audit. Connecting this idea with the previous question, the previous mistake about documenting processes, always make sure that when you record the documentation, when you consolidate the procedure for one of your organization's processes, all those involved, the main people responsible for the activities that are carried out by that process, are appropriate, are in agreement with what is being documented. And of course, if you are the quality manager, you should naturally have suggestions for improvements when mapping a process and identifying the way things are done. Take advantage of this moment to also propose process improvements in your organization. And last but not least, there is a common mistake that we see is the disconnection of the objectives of the quality management system from the planning. Don't make this mistake with the organization's strategic objectives, especially if you are just starting to implement a quality management system in your organization. Don't treat the ISO standard, certification, or the entire quality system in isolation from the business strategy. On the contrary, the more integrated it is, the more relevant this management system is to senior management. Fundamental, critical information about the process, about the effectiveness of things, about how the operation works within the company, with much more relevance and much more space at the discussion tables, quality will have. So make sure you don't make the mistake of creating a quality management process just for the sake of certification, just to pass the audit, just so you have the documents you need. On the contrary, make it make sense for the organization. Make quality make sense within the company's strategic planning. Within the audit, how do we assess this? We usually start, or at least spend a good part of the audit time talking to senior management about the ISO 9001, this quality ISO, which is no longer an operational ISO, but the shop floor, as some people think and have in mind, it is more strategic. It's a strategic standard and talks about business, about organization, about the sustainability and longevity of a company. So, when we sit down to talk to and audit top management, we want to understand where that management is looking, what the medium-term, short-term outlook of that organization is. And we need to ensure that the objectives that are being pursued and determined in the specific requirements of the quality management system are in line with the organization's strategic objectives. They can't. They shouldn't be disconnected things. They need to go hand in hand. So reevaluate when you map out your company's processes. Evaluate how those KPIs, those indicators, are providing sustainability to achieve the organization's ultimate goal. Don't let that beautiful map of your company's mission, vision, and values be just a piece of paper on the wall or a pretty page on your website. Make sure that the objectives you are pursuing are aligned with your business strategy, your mission, the ultimate goal of the company, your purpose and mission. So, important and relevant tips for this audit and also for your business. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll leave a comment here. If you can think of any other mistakes you've made, any tips you can give to a colleague who is implementing ISO 9001 in their organization. Thank you. See you soon.